Awesome. Good afternoon, everyone. I will call to order this regular meeting of the Mammoth Lakes Fire Protection District Board of Commissioners for June 24th, 2025. Do we have someone to call the roll?
Yes.
Yes. All right. Commissioner Bulkley,
Here.
Commissioner Easterby,
Here.
Commissioner Mandel,
Here.
Commissioner Truex,
Here.
not Commissioner Correll. Okay.
Thank you. We have a quorum.
We have a quorum.
Okay. With that, I'll proceed to item number 2, the board meeting minutes from April 22nd, 2024. Are there any revisions or questions on it? Oh.
There we go.
Thank you. Board meeting minutes from April 22nd, 2024. Any revisions or questions? If not, I'd entertain a motion to approve.
I'd move to approve.
Should read 25, correct?
What's that?
Oh, yes, 2025. It wasn't that long ago.
Did John move to approve?
I would move to approve the minutes of April 22nd, 2025.
I will second.
Thank you, commissioners. Roll call, please.
All right. Commissioner Bulkley,
Yes.
Commissioner Easterby,
Yes.
Commissioner Mandel,
Yes.
Commissioner Truex.
Abstain. I was
Okay.
not here. Okay, motion carries.
Yes.
Okay, we have no special presentations. Is there any public comment in the room or online? Okay. Seeing none, and we don't have a consent agenda item, I'll move us to item number 6, the budget. Review of fiscal year 24-25 year-to-date general fund budget variance from Chief Meyer.
So just kind of zooming out, but we're going to cover a couple different things. We'll go through the here today for where we are today. I'm working on something larger to start to really show what our budget is doing outside of our general fund, and have a little bit of that view today, but trying to expand on that as we go through the budget process. And then, yeah, so remember tradition, what we've done in the past is we adopt a preliminary budget at this meeting as we are required to do. But because there's such a delay in speaking with our CPA, we didn't receive some things till October. Unfortunately, we are required to adopt our final budget by October 1st. And we're going to spend the next few months kind of tweaking the budget and adjusting so that for that last meeting, you have as many of the pieces as you need to put together a final budget. So again, the preliminary budget this year is just a reflection of the current budget. And we'll start shaping what that final budget looks like by our September meeting. So if there's any, there might be some overlap questions on the 3 items under the agenda, but we'll start with this year's agenda on 7. So we did receive our second apportionment just about a week and a half ago. So unfortunately, it didn't make it into this report, but the second apportionment came in at 1.6 million, which is slightly above the ABA projection. So we're still going in the right direction on the trajectory. I would say there's this significant decrease in the growth that we've seen in comparison to 2 previous years and where that's going. And I think that that's something we're like caution for next year to budget relatively conservatively, because that gap between ABA projections and what we're actually seeing is closing. So we're at the point of where we are at our highest cap point on the district, and we're not going to see any sizable revenues coming in. See our first apportionment next year, roughly around January. So that puts us at about 4.7 on actual property taxes. Again, about 200,000 above what we had budgeted at. As far as other lease revenues, the biggest variance is gonna be that assistance for hire category, which reflects the fact that we went out significantly for wildfires last year. Again, the portion that you see in the general operating budget is just the piece that goes back towards general expenses. There's a piece that plans towards capital expenditures, and that's a little bit here. The one thing to remember is from the revenue side, everything comes in on the assistance for hire category. From the expense side, a portion goes into that, but there's a whole bunch of indirect costs as well. So, for example, if Tyson goes out on a fire, Gilbert may cover him, and that overtime comes in our overtime category because it's not really direct fire cost. Tyson's time is on the fire cost. Gilbert's is not. Just like there's indirect costs that are always found, there's occasionally indirect, what you could call savings. But I'd be careful with those in the sense that, if we send Chief Such out on a fire, we see a proportional increase in the category of barely paid Jeff out of. The problem is we don't get any of Jeff's time and services. I think we see that further in the budget. And as we look at next year's budget, you just have to be careful not to make assumptions on where we had true savings and where those might be one-time savings and to reflect for those savings occurring. There's, Jeff, I don't know if there's for the lease revenue, I think that's something I touch on, maybe some lease revenue.
I think that's fine.
Yeah. We've got a closed item on here at the end of the agenda, and fortunately not going to be able to cover everything today, but obviously lease revenue we budgeted conservatively because it was an item that's in flux, and I'd say that that's still currently the situation. Any questions on revenues at this time?
Chief, is there any advantage in the case where the example you used, Tyson goes out on a fire, someone backfills, that overtime goes against normal overtime? Is there any advantage to us to track that against assistance for hire as a cost for recovery purposes?
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know,
So we've had those discussions and some of those get pretty complex and tough. So known right now is just the direct cost that we know are there. Because there's some things that are true indirect costs. And I'll give you another example of one that not gonna say we have to eat, but we're gonna be stuck with them regardless of whether the fire occurs. For those, I try to keep it on the indirect side and not putting them into that. Because I'm more concerned about that if we didn't have any fires and shown those in the budget, that we'd be in a worse position. An example of that is traditionally we keep our kind of part-time volunteer seasonal staff. We used to keep them under $970. And the main driver for that is just the economics of ways that go over those hours is you have to provide healthcare for them. And most organizations choose to just keep their seasonal below that cap. We did allow our part-time staff to go above that cap. And it was with this direct intent to let them get out and fight these fires. And we made adjustments to their healthcare to where they pick up a stipend that they can put towards their healthcare, which is different from kind of our year-round full-time staff. So in some ways, it'd be great if we could show that healthcare is pretty tied to the fires. But it's difficult to do because, some of that's occurring in December. So there's quite a few indirect costs, such as healthcare that we've picked up now that the district has to carry. But it's difficult to tie those to, if we don't have any fires next year, we are still gonna have to put those on that annual year and really should budget for that because it's gonna be a standing cost. So I'd rather be able to conservatively say, in our line item for healthcare costs, we recognize we have to pick up this portion and sometimes benefit from having a little bit more which is back to the district on the revenue side, as opposed to trying to capture everything that missing things and not being able to
Okay.
balance the budget. Because if we don't have any fires, I might not have had a budget category captured on. So that kind of makes sense there. It's probably the more conservative way of looking at it. Now that said, we've run pretty extensive Excel sheets that actually Mike can speak on those. That truly do look at all the actual costs, direct and indirect, to have an understanding of where the district is going. And we need those both from making sure we're conducting business appropriately, as well as we look at our contracts with employees to make sure that there's any areas that we need to clean up so we can properly reimburse. So we are doing all of that, it's just not occurring here.
Yeah, you don't have to go through it. I just, on the margin, when you think of someone who's at, well, you're keeping under 970 hours, you're at 960, all of a sudden you send Tyson and Chief Such out and you need 2 part-time people and the only ones you got puts them over there, you're 970, you're suddenly now
Yes,
getting
a domino
a
effect.
domino effect of that kind of stuff and it's an
Right.
academic question.
Yeah, I think, but it's academic, but it's also real. I think
Yeah.
that's the important part of the right to recognize there are true indirect impacts of these things that are sometimes very positive. Like, give you another example. We brought in capital expenditures and are purchasing a type 3 that we probably would not have purchased if we just weren't into something. But the flip side of that is we're also putting wear and tear on our vehicles, right? We can capture some of those things. So unfortunately, our budgeting's not as sophisticated to where we can depreciate those assets quicker. I always say we've had similar discussions on should we create a accounts receivable fund to really show what we're bringing in. Had some initial discussions with Bill on that. But based kind of on our limited accounting capacity, I feel like the current method we're using is probably
That's fine.
reasonable for capturing.
I didn't mean to get us off in the weeds, but
It's very appropriate.
Yeah, the only thing I'll add is that for what we get reimbursed at, we don't need to track those. They have a standard formula for reimbursing us, so it doesn't matter that we have to track whether we track that stuff or not. In theory, it's supposed to make us whole for backfilling for those persons. We did do deeper accounting. It's pretty close the most time. It doesn't work out perfect because if you backfill an engineer with a captain or something like that, those kind of things, right? But it's pretty close. And one thing they changed for this year is there was a 10% admin kind of overhead fee that they reimburse us at. They bumped that to 15% this year. And that's a little bit of our slush fund to cover when the personnel costs don't quite match up. I mean, it's supposed to cover the admin cost of administering the stuff too, and it does, but it helps us with a little bit of margin around the error too.
The other thing I'd say is we are unique as a department, and there's, again, associated costs that we would have that other departments have as sunken costs. And that healthcare is a great example of that. They're assuming that if you are a full-time department sending people out, you do not get reimbursed for healthcare because healthcare is something you have to provide for Tyson regardless year round. Now that we've created these new employees, we've created healthcare costs that we didn't have in the past. So for us, those are costs that the district usually wouldn't carry and now has to carry them. And the other impact is we have to carry those for at least a period of 1 year. So these are long-term impacts that, we have to be cognizant of as we're making decisions financially.
I think as long as we're all aware,
Yeah.
it's not just an apples to apples thing.
Sure. Okay. So if there's no questions on the revenue side, I'll start moving through expenses. And again, this conversation that we just had is going to be relevant on the expense side, especially. Originally, when we budgeted, we had, the concept was we generally run a budget that is neutral and isn't pulling from our fund balance. And last year, we made the decision to provide services at the level that we feel is appropriate and then try to make savings as we work through and then recognize that we may have to pivot as a district in November, depending on what Measure M does. So just kind of a reminder where we were last year. With expenses on the personnel side, we were able to bring most of those kind of to where we'd honestly want to be. Again, that number is at 114% of total budget. But the biggest reflection on that is again, that assistance for hire category, which came in at 700,000. And again, I would argue that we're not capturing all the costs there. So in some ways, that number is significantly higher for what it cost us to send districts out. There are other areas, so things like overtime are impacted, negatively, where we had budgeted and we came in. So overtime is on page 7. We had budgeted for about 60,000 and we spent almost double that. And that's a lot of that is a reflection of sending these apparatus out. The one area that we did see some savings is if you look at division chiefs, that category is low. And it's primarily because we had budgeted for Chief Morrow to be returning. She retired. And then additionally, some of those division chief costs weren't in that category because they were out on fires. So other than that, everything is lining up kind of where we would have expected it to, with budget being right around 90 to 100%. We've gone through our 13 pay periods at this point. So there is a little bit that's left in this month that will eventually get pulled back into this fiscal year. But there's actually a chunk of this year that gets pulled back in from the previous year that hasn't been accounted for. So that number will go up slightly, but it's essentially where we expect it to be. The one couple areas that we're seeing lag is we've grown the organization pretty significantly. If you consider the fact that our full-time staff has stayed the same, but we are now at about 11, 12 members on our seasonal program, which is about 6 months of the year. So you're essentially adding 6 more employees full-time equivalent. So there's quite a bit of growth there. And that growth has been occurring over the last couple of years. And we end up seeing kind of a delay in some of our things, such as workers' comp. Workers' comp always takes a look at the previous year and budgets off of that. So a couple of these categories are going to be playing catch up for the next few years. So we figure out kind of what's our equilibrium point as an organization, and we are sitting there. So overall, I feel like we captured personal costs relatively well, for the various we had, for instance, and that sort of thing. Any questions on that? Okay, so I'll keep moving through the budget. Admin costs are approximately where we'd expect them to be. Again, accounting is a little higher, and some of that is just due to the GASB reporting. So I'm going to bring that up next year to reflect some of that, as well as kind of where I foresee accounting costs moving for the organization as we try to make those changes like Commissioner Mendel mentioned as we move to a more robust accounting. And then, the area that just we keep seeing inflation not stop is food. Every year I bump it up significantly, and every year it's right there again. I'd have to check on the memberships for why that category is high. I believe it's because we contract with an organization called Lexipol, and sometimes we put that under training. Sometimes we put that under memberships. They help us with a lot of our standard operating procedures. So that's kind of the only larger outlier there, other than accounting. But it does seem like it's still going up, but the trajectory, fortunately, on the expense side is not as bad as it was over the last 3 years. Any questions on admin expenses? And then, so moving on to logistics, we've seen significant costs in kind of 2 areas, buildings and grounds, as well as equipment maintenance. The buildings and grounds is some of just taking on, frankly, what aren't even large projects, but just kind of trying to keep the buildings up to where they need to be. Station 1 was a relatively new building. Scott's not here, but I think it's about 15 years old. And a little more than that. It's making me feel old. And so we're just really starting to hit that cycle of doing repairs on it. I mean, the big one on this station is the leaking roof. That'll be a hundreds of thousands of dollar replacement. And then strategically, Station 2 needs to catch up to Station 1 and getting up to the condition that it's in. So I believe we're going to have significant work there. Some of those will be capital expenditures, which we'll talk a little bit. Some of that's going to be just regular maintenance that goes into the budget. But, just putting in a washer dryer at Station 2 when we worked through ended up costing us close to $40,000. And some of that goes to the more we can do some of this work in-house, and as we're looking at increasing our staff capacity, making sure we're hiring people for the right reasons, right? So all of our staff is already firefighters, but like we mentioned, for our full-time staff, we're really looking for kind of what we called LTAP, the administrative, the logistics, admin, training, prevention. And the goal is that those people have some of those skill sets. And as we look at next year's budget, and I'm looking at bringing to you, some increases in what that staffing is, some of those asks of the employees that we hire are, working on facilities, frankly, because some of the work we have to outsource for multiple reasons, but some of it we can do in-house when we have the skill sets to do some of that, and we should be keeping up with that. Going on further, just touching again kind of on the equipment costs. There's a combination of two things. One is when you run, I think our engine 3332 put more miles on it last year than it had in its first 15 years that we had it as an engine, which is good. Equipment is most expensive when it sits and doesn't do anything. So it's being used, but that does get reflected in our equipment maintenance. And then some of our equipment maintenance is just the fleet, right? We've held on to pieces such as 3333, which is the engine downstairs, supposed to get replaced. We have a second ladder truck that was supposed to get replaced. We've held on to those. I still think it's the right call, because if you depreciate that piece of equipment over the timeline, it makes more sense to hold on to it a little further, but it does increase some of our maintenance costs. So we'll be working to bump those categories up. We do have truck 3361, which is our primary ladder truck, out of district in Sparks right now. When it went through its UL testing, which is United Laboratories does standard testing on it, they found that it had some drift in the ladder that had to be worked on. It may be covered under warranty. It may be a significant expense, but it's just the cost of doing business for large, expensive pieces of apparatus. So again, I feel good about where our logistics category is, with those two areas being ones that we're going to address in the next budget, some with personnel changes, some with just recognizing we're going to be outsourcing that work. We have had some increases from the town, which because of our contract, we basically pay for cost of labor. They've just seen their labor costs go up for their mechanics. So we have a very good contract with them. It's just, like I said, there's been a lag on some of these categories when they don't bring that increase to us every year, but they did bring it to us last year.
Does this equipment maintenance, does this reflect pretty much through the end of the fiscal year? Or are you waiting for some things to come in on that?
So
'Cause it doesn't seem that
generally
bad
what
right now.
should happen is the budget should reflect when services occurred.
Yeah.
So if the truck gets fixed within the next 2 weeks, this piece will get brought in there. That category, regardless of where the truck goes, probably needs to come up over time.
Yeah.
It used to be very large, and some of that was, there's how much of this is equipment maintenance, and then should you be capitalizing anything? And truly, you shouldn't be capitalizing any maintenance cost, but there were things in the past that were capital expenditures that went in there. So this category needs to go up a little bit regardless. Will it go up? Maybe. We also have things in our budget, and an example is our third apportionment. It's not very large. It's usually around $40,000, but we won't even see that till November. So that's where really closing out this budget is incredibly hard. We don't get reports back from the county till September on October on some things. And I'm not gonna say we're, budgeting in the blind, but we're budgeting with kind of making some assumptions. And that's where really historically we've done this preliminary budget just as a reflection of the current budget. And as these things close out over the next couple of months, it gives us a better idea of what these categories actually end up at, so that when we go to that September budget, we'll know where last year's budget ended up.
Thanks.
Okay, moving on from logistics. So prevention, the one area here that did go up is the permits and that process. Mike can talk on this a little bit, but what you'll see is generally, our expense side should be a reflection of our revenue side as well. So we see permits on the revenue side, that category is high as well. It is slightly lower, and I would say that as Mike's working through updating our fee schedule, currently, we're probably not capturing all of our costs that happen in the permitting process on the expense side in the revenues. The goal is not to make money there, but it is to reimburse the district for the expenses there. So over time, that category will come back, but it should be basically a neutral budget category for the district. One area that we're having some internal discussions on the admin side is how much do we want to pull either the wildland program or fuels management out of existing categories and have those captured. We do have some requirements for Measure M that we're capturing certain items. And there's multiple ways that we can do that for that reporting that we have to do. But right now, it's really a question of what makes the most sense for the district between the different programs. You know, an example of that is something like a chipping tool is clearly going towards fuels mitigation. Making a distinction that a piece of apparatus is going towards uniquely wildland is again a little blurrier. So we're working through that with staff, and we'll come back with some recommendations on what that should look like in the next budget so that we're meeting all of our requirements from the Measure M perspective, as well as providing good budgeting so we know where things are going. So, and then training, again, we've been trying to keep some of our training costs in-house, which is why that category is a little lower. And then utilities are relatively getting up to speed. If Chief Walker was here, he would complain about our backup battery systems and the issues we're having with SCE. And I don't know how much of those reflect it are in the electrical costs being high versus just the cost of electricity going up. But overall, that category is at 93%. So I'm, you know, comfortable that we're kind of catching up to that curve there. The one larger fee that's not reflected in here is also the Mona County admin charge, which was about $100,000. So this puts our budget, I believe, once we get all these, you know, the capture Commissioner Truax's questions on a couple of catch-up items, we're going to end up relatively neutral. But again, recognizing that we captured some of those costs by the decrease in not having a chief officer come back. And then we also have some costs that next year may be there if we don't send people out to fires, and we're not saving those costs by sending, say, a chief such out on fires. I'd also note we lost the services of Chief Such when we sent him out. So there's a give and take there. So any questions on this year's budget? Okay. So the next piece that I wanted to go over with this group, and this is one that I want to flush out as I work with our CPA on it. But if you go to page 10, there's generally items that are basically kind of off the annual budget. And those are things that are occurring that are not tied to operating this year. And, you know, the best example of that is you saw on our annual operating budget, we pull out of it our capital replacement fund of $646,000. Can't magically make money disappear in an organization unless you're Enron. So that actually goes somewhere, and it goes kind of out of the annual budget, and it goes into, right now it's kind of all booked as one. The board set up quite a few different funds that we wanted to work on, such as, you know, we've got our capital replacement that we had split into apparatus and facilities, and had a couple other ones in there, and I'll go over those at the next meeting. But the goal is to capture all of those here. We have some constraints using QuickBooks in the sense that we can't truly create a whole bunch of different funds in QuickBooks. We truly have just one fund. So what we do is pull these things out onto this side of the house. And what I want to do is give you updates on where those funds are and what they're going to be doing over the next few years. And I'll give you an example of that as we work off the operating fund books, if you want to call it that. We moved 646. That's 14.5% of our budget. 8% of that went into facilities. 6.5% of that went into equipment. We also saw equipment reimbursement out on incidents at $462,000. Then we also saw a couple smaller items on there. The biggest one is the 200,000 that you see on capital expenditure grants. That was the 200,000 that we received in reimbursement for the tent. So we had the tent damage that occurred a few years ago. Again, it wouldn't make sense. We capitalized those repairs there. Really wouldn't make sense to put it in this budget because it would look like we were heavy on having revenues come in because it's really reimbursing the district on that side. So overall, this looks really good this year, but again, it's important to note that these are highly variable over years. So as an example on that, this last year, the board approved purchasing a new type 3 piece of equipment. That type 3 piece of equipment was approved by the board this year, but it won't be on the budget till we actually receive it, which will be next year. That piece of apparatus was about $550,000. But the reality is it's a new piece of apparatus. So we're actually going to have to equip it with hose and everything. So it will be well above $600,000 when that piece comes in. I foresee coming to the board asking for more equipment for our fuels mitigation work. We have some ambulance needs. We're most likely gonna have to replace our ambulance next year. So while this year we are 1.3 in the green, next year we will easily be bringing over $1 million in capital expenditure requests to the board. Some the board has already approved, and there's going to be that variance. So main reason that this is outside of the budget is so you can have a good idea of what you're spending annually.
Chief, do we earmark, sorry,
Absolutely.
do we earmark or approve at the time we approve things? I mean, so, we looked at the budget when it came, Richard
Yep.
Press, boom, we put stake in the ground, yes, buy it. We did that based upon the finances that we looked at that time. Do we capture that somewhere so we're not?
Good question.
We're in a lot better position than we are.
Yeah, so one thing that needs work over time is our capital improvement plan. And I just sat down with Chief Such this morning talking about making sure that we're putting enough away every year to capture, he mentioned this projector probably needs to go. And I go, great, but let's look at this whole room. What do we need to be running Zoom and all of these things? And these end up being significant expenses when you're building these. And don't just give me a cost on what that is, but give me a life cycle on, are we replacing this every 10 years? Those are areas that the district has frankly just not had the capacity to keep up with. And it's probably one of the reasons we've created these shock absorbers in the budget. So as we move towards having the budget a little tighter, we have to make sure that we're keeping money in the capital replacements to work through some of these issues. And I would argue that in the big picture, yes, that is getting captured. In the more devil's in the details approach, I think we have to take some long, significant looks at how many ladder trucks should this district have? What is the type of equipment, as far as fire apparatus that we should be running? And what does the district look like? I think anytime you're looking at 10 years, you're fooling yourselves, but we should have a good idea of 5 years out. What do we want these large ticket items to work on? So that's something that the chief officers are very involved in. And we do adjust for that in both our long-term Excel sheets that keep track of our equipment, as well as recognizing that's going to occur even though it's not in this year's budget. Does that answer that question?
Yes.
Okay. So again, my goal is to have for you in the next couple months, these non-general fund revenues and expenses, and really to also forecast where we need to go next year. I already kind of alluded to it, but as we're making program changes, there's other specific pieces of equipment that we're going to have to purchase for that. And then we also have equipment that the board has already approved that are going to be showing up in that budget. And, this, as we grow, it's very easy to look at where we're growing staff with a 12-person wildland program or 3 or 4 additional full-time staff. It's all those impacts that we start to see over the next period of time that we really have to think about. And the other discussion we had was computers. As you start to look more like a larger department, with people sharing computers when they come on shift, come off of shift, and those are all the things we have to capture as we budget moving forward. So that's kind of where we are with the budget today. And if we could move to the request for adoption on the 2025-2026 preliminary budget and setting a final budget hearing for September 23rd. Again, what you have before you in the preliminary budget, I apologize for the small font, but this is essentially this last year's budget. And it's really not a reflection of where we want to be with the final budget. We're just going to take the next 3 months to do that as I get more information that I can get to the board. The only piece that I did add to this budget is Measure M, that we know is roughly going to be about $900,000. And I wanted to make sure we have that in there as we start to work with, all the unknown changes that we'll be working through. And there are kind of more board decisions and policy decisions on where we go. But the goal would be to give you an idea of what we're looking at from a staffing perspective, what we're looking at from a changes in our fleet and facilities. And then, the other big piece that I think is a little bit of a board decision is we were working through our Measure M. And it was interesting because we ended up going through parcels that are exempt from Measure M. It gave me some insight on what every other district and public organization is doing for its employees that Mammoth Fire is not currently doing, and frankly is the most demanding of its employees by having its employees live within 7 minutes driving time of a fire station. So if you look at the hospital, the water district, the town, any organization that is a public organization in town, they have a significant portfolio of assistance for their employees for housing. I think we're starting to build up some funds to where we can start looking at that problem. I believe that the solution for housing is not a one solution fits all. Having some discussions with staff, there's clearly different types of needs. And I think we also have to be careful that we don't dive into a market that I frankly think is really high, but it's difficult to tell. Is it high because the trajectory of Mammoth is heading this way, irrespective of what the rest of the nation's doing? Or it's high because the nation's high and you really don't want to make a huge commitment on this time. So, we've got quite a few programs. We're working on updating our housing assistance. The water district has a very good program there. And the nice thing is, because the district retains that equity, it allows you to deal with housing without making, there is a cash commitment to where you are locking up district resources, but ultimately that comes back to the district. So you can create a revolving fund to take care of your employees. And I think those are some important discussions that we need to have as we look at, how do we allocate the budget this next year, making sure that we're dealing with our strategic problems as well as our program and operational needs that we clearly have the need to do, such as wildfire or assisting other programs. So that being said, again, nothing too dramatic in this preliminary budget, recognizing we're working with a limited amount of information. So my recommended action would be that, we go through deliberation, but this is our preliminary budget. And then we have to set a public hearing for September 23rd for our final budget, which is the last board meeting that we can legally hold it at. Any questions on that?
I just want to mention on the housing piece, and obviously this is it's a long-term, project and challenge, but I do just want to make sure that we're communicating, town's doing a number of things with housing projects and just making sure that council law, making sure that we're communicating. Making sure that we're just communicating that to everyone in the interim until we are able to do something, because I think there's some good opportunities out there right now.
Yep, absolutely. I think that, the more we can use outside resources to solve that problem, the better off we're going to be. So that's certainly, anytime that's an option, we're going to do that. And yes, we're working with the association. We've started working through our negotiations to update our memorandum of understanding, or basically our employee agreements. And the nice thing that I was encouraged by is the fact that sometimes you feel like you have to remind people like, hey, you have to put money towards retirement. You have to put these things. The good thing is it was coming from both sides of the table. So they were actually mentioning like housing is becoming a larger issue for us. That gets reflected in negotiations, right? Because we have to, as an organization, be putting funding if that is truly a strategic challenge for the district. or weakness if we are, behind where other organizations are. We all have to reflect that that's gonna require district resources to solve. And it's better to have that conversation with everybody kind of agreeing that we need to work on that.
Any other questions on the preliminary budget? In that case, I'd entertain a motion.
Oh, my glasses. I move that we approve the 2025-2026 preliminary budget and set the final budget hearing for, is that September 23rd, 2025?
A motion and a second, roll call please.
Commissioner Buckley,
Yes.
Commissioner Easterby,
Yes.
Commissioner Mandel,
Yes.
Commissioner Truax.
Yes.
Motion carries 4-0.
Great. We have no old business, so I'll move on to item number 8, new business, presentation on LAFCO adoption of the 2025 Mammoth Lakes Fire Protection District and Sphere of Influence Report.
So what you have starting on page 13 is it's the municipal services review for the fire district that was adopted a couple weeks ago by LAFCO. And I think there's a couple things to create some perspective on this report. It's just a snapshot of a point in time. So there are things since this report was written that are frankly, not correct in the sense that we don't currently have a retired annuitant. There's little things that are gonna be changing over a period of time. What I would say is the last report that we had was done in 2009, so 16 years, and really did not reflect the district at all of where we are today. So while there's little things in here, I think that it portrays a pretty good picture of where we are. The report was originally done by Aaron Bauer, who at the time was a contract external consultant for the county. She since then has been picked up by the county, but she spent quite a bit of time working with staff on trying to get a good picture, went through quite a bit of commissioner reports and that sort of thing, and then did some interviews to make sure she's getting a good picture of where the district is. So I felt comfortable with moving forward with this. The one area that again got mentioned by LAFCO is actually by Tom Cage, who also works on the water district, is, you're really there's not a ton in this report on housing. And I think it really shows how, but over the last years, that's something the district has recognized, and we are truly starting to work on, that as a kind of strategic threat to the district. So other than that, I think it's reflective of where we are. And again, this is something that Chief Freeball started in 2020 and has taken us this long to get to. There was recently a grand jury investigation and reports done on the LAFCO and the speed at which some of these are occurring, which I certainly can say that it's a very long process. And with roughly how many districts are there within the county? That's 30 districts. Ideally, there's different interpretations of this, but they should be occurring about every 5 years. We are in a better position than other organizations at this point. We're still waiting to get through their municipal service reviews. These are when we talk about all sorts of issues, but for example, our relationship with Lock Valley and how that should be reflected in both district lines, mutual aid agreements, and how we provide services. So again, I think it's a snapshot in time, but much better than the one we had in 2009.
Yeah, a couple things I really appreciated about this report. One was, which I just think are important things, whenever we're speaking to the public about the district, and that's that, we haven't had significant population growth, but we have definitely had a huge increase in calls and just the number of the calls that are medical in nature.
Yep. The other area so technically it's a municipal services review and sphere of influence report with recommendations. Again, the LAFCO did move forward with these recommendations. originally, when the district had looked at this, we were looking at, should we be expanding services? And if so, how far? And the area under question was Madera County, and do we look at Reds Meadow? Do we look at the full ski area? And at that time, the decision was made, we should at least be covering the full ski area, because frankly, we can't even tell you where a call is coming from on the ski area. And additionally, we've clearly been doing inspections out on portions of the ski area that are in Madera County. So the recommendation was made that the ski area is completely included for that sphere of influence. Reds Meadows, a little more challenging because there's some, impacts for our constituents. Even if we had the ability to provide services there, there's a big difference driving 4 miles up to Main Lodge to having some responsibility for areas that we can't even frankly get to sometimes in the winter. I still feel that those areas are best served through mutual aid agreements, just like we do for our Long Valley. The reality is our district ends at Meridian. We technically, Long Valley's district is down at 203 and 395, but I've made it very clear that we are going to continue to provide services into that area and do that through our mutual aid agreement. It creates a relationship where, protects the tax base that they have historically had, but also recognizing that it is in our best interest to take care of people when we are a close resource for them. So
Have a mutual aid agreement with Madera County.
we do not have a direct mutual aid agreement with Madera County. So we have worked default through our agreements with Mono County. Mono County has an agreement with Madera County. I'll say that all those things are being looked at. Some of those are LAFCO issues. Some are frankly larger than LAFCO issues. Once you start looking at moving county lines, you're at LAFCOs, which really look at districts within county. So this may come back for discussion if at some point either the town or the county moves all the way down into Reds Meadow. We may reassess if it makes sense for us to provide services. We've historically supported the whole town with the exception of the airport. So if they decided to move down into Reds Meadow, we'd have to really do an analysis of what that means for the district.
Madera can't access Reds Meadow
That is correct.
at all.
Yeah.
It's difficult.
So,
Yeah.
I think 50% of the time is
Sure.
better than 0% of the time.
I agree. I think the question is, an argument could be made. Somebody asked me the other day, could we help support medical services in Chalfont, White Mountain? I would say maybe, but is that in the best interest of this district? And so I believe we have a responsibility for our constituents. And then once you start looking into areas like Redmond, you can absolutely make the case, but I think that that's a pretty significant discussion that we'd have to do some analysis and really see kind of what our partner organizations are considering. And we tend to move as a group on things because we found that, our interests are often common aligned. So I would say that, let's see where that one goes over the next few years, but those are large ones. So again, this was informational only at this point. The district will keep moving forward. Initially, this started with a sphere of influence application, which the district kind of filed, but never completely filed with the LAFCO. The LAFCO said, let's wait and do your municipal services review first, because that will have to happen in that. So the goal is to, as we have staff time, keep moving forward with this sphere of influences request.
Any other questions or comments on the LAFCO report? Okay, then let's move on to item 8B, the presentation on emergency medical services in the community.
So this slide, this starts on page 54 of your packet. And at this point, it's information only. And we can either throw it up on the TV screens, or I'm basically just gonna be talking through all the slides. So if you're comfortable with the slides, I realize it's a really small text, but I don't feel like you probably need it. Do you want to see it up on the TVs, or are you good with just me reading through it?
I'm good here, but do you guys want to see it? Might be nice. Sure.
Jeff, can you figure out a way to? gives me a chance to eat, so I appreciate it.
Exactly. Yeah. Should tell Commissioner Mendel to bring more cookies.
Is it easier off the?
Trash and cookie.
You're really valuable to this room.
Do we have to do an iPad trick on it to switch it to? What's that? I don't know. Choose spot fire.
Thanks, Jeff. That's great.
Some cookies.
Yeah, take a peanut cookie. Thanks, Chris.
Double espresso.
Put that on the menu for next one. Oh my gosh, wow.
We need more. I figure somebody's gonna.
Wow,
Wow.
Oh
We don't need more. I figure somebody's gonna.
Yeah, absolutely.
They're gonna want some. Yeah.
Thank you.
Would help you.
Hopefully this weekend I'll ride my bike further.
There you go. Yeah.
So I have to kill the section here. If it's easier, I can also just print some copies, put them in the back there.
Yeah, I mean, it's not a, yeah, we can. I think you guys will get the gist of it as we go.
Jeff, I can try to log into the Zoom meeting and share it from my computer if you think that'd be easier.
It's, we have it back, right?
Yeah, it's in the deck.
You got up here. You got all back here. You can share. Sorry.
Okay, all right. In the
Yeah,
interest of
I'll-
time, then we'll.
This is really a presentation board. There's nothing that's new to them, so
Yeah,
I think I
there's
can
not a lot over here.
probably speak through it.
Thanks, everybody.
Just be spends budget.
Yeah,
That's right.
so amend that budget.
So I want to take a little time to kind of go over some, basically laying out the facts on the ground for the board. I've had some similar discussions with some of our partners in this space. And it stems from the fact that, you know, if you look at Measure M, I believe that ultimately, when you look at kind of the strengths and weaknesses and opportunities and challenges for the districts, the biggest challenge we face today as a district that we need to address more of is wildfire. That's just an obvious, let's see, be an existential threat to the town and district, and both public safety as well as economic drivers impact. But we're also in a position where we're going to be changing up some of our structure as a fire district. And these kind of like shifts that don't occur very often. And it also provides us with some opportunities to really look at the district as a whole, and look at some of the other challenges that this, I would say, not just this community, but this region faces. And is there an opportune time to look at some of those? This is in no way a reflection of not having enough work to do. That's probably the piece that scares me the most about this, is looking at, large program improvements. We've got quite a bit on our plate, but, due to the fact that we are going to be having some unique opportunities in the next 6 months here, I don't think we could not take a look at this issue. So a little bit about pre-hospital medical care and I'm just referring to the Mammoth Lakes community, kind of in that our district responsibilities are within our district, but obviously we have an impact on the region as a whole. Just as an example on that, last summer when we had the MCI occur at the Chernoff to June Lake, we ended up sending 3 ambulances that Mammoth Fire ultimately was able to support. One was our ambulance, one was the backup county ambulance, and the third one we grabbed the hospital ambulance. So we staffed those with EMTs, took them to the scene. Is that a responsibility? I'd say absolutely. I mean, a lot of the kids came from the town of Mount Lake, some came from Crowley, but every time we can, just like we do with the fire districts in whole, I believe we have some level of responsibility to support the EMS system as we can. And we've been doing that historically for a long period of time. Currently, the way that the system is structured is the county has essentially the agreement for providing EMS services for the county, and the fire district has what's called 201 rights to provide an ambulance that runs. But because it's BLS, what ends up happening is it runs when there's no other ambulances available. And forgive me if I use words or definitions that you're just not familiar with. ALS is advanced life support, paramedics, a level of care that takes about a year of training. EMT is about 100 hours. It's a little more now of training, and generally less experienced providers. The county system has ambulances, as you're probably aware, up in the Walker Colville area, Bridgeport, June Lake, and then Mammoth Lakes. And what tends to happen is at busier times, those units come down to help support the Mammoth Lakes community, and then they kind of bump back into their area. Sometimes as events occur, obviously, you don't have June Lake ambulance here all the time. And I think the area that we're seeing kind of more of is as this community is growing, you're seeing that second call when it's maybe not the weekend, right? So Medic 3 is on a call, and then there's a second call, which we have historically covered. It's the 3371 is our ambulance, and then takes that call. So that system works fairly well. One thing I would note is it's fairly expensive, and in some ways, emergency medical services are expensive, and that has a whole bunch of implications. But one is growing it is incredibly hard, especially under the current model. So if you take a look, the budget for the county program is about 5.5 million. So you're running about 1.5 million per ambulance to provide those services. And I can tell you that I don't believe that Mammoth Fire could do it any economically cheaper than the county can. There are a couple of distinctions though, in what I believe are kind of dual mandate systems where you're providing 2 services at the time, have some value. And because we're going to be increasing one portion, we're already going to have some sunken costs, and it's worth looking at, do we help on that other side? So again, I would say that Mono County is probably very unique to what you see in other places. Incredibly, counties that have low revenues generally can't afford to provide a robust EMS program like you see here. So they end up generally subsidizing a private ambulance company like AMR. The whole area of Inyo County is frankly subsidized. It's subsidized in a different way than you would think. And that is now AMR is in there providing services, but the main reason they're doing that is because they also have the flights that come out of Bishop. And there's revenue to be made there to where the air provider felt that it was in their best interest to also provide a ground ambulance to provide that area. If you have anything occurring outside of Bishop further south, you're going to have very limited EMS capabilities. And one of the beauties of our system is you have very good EMS across the whole county for a rural system. As counties have higher revenue opportunities, if they're at the kind of high end, what you end up seeing is a county fire department like you see in Santa Barbara, LA County, Orange County, that also provides EMS support. And those are incredibly expensive systems because you're essentially trying to provide fire and EMS across the whole county. Generally, what you see between kind of the private provider model and the larger, more well-off counties is some sort of combination where, frankly, they're doing a lot of like supporting different areas in different ways. And you see fire districts that have some support for EMS, and then they, also have some responsibilities and they provide services. Again, the system we have here as a third service for just EMS is relatively unique. The county board has made some, I would call, strategic decisions that if you look back through their previous blue ribbon committees that they've had on the EMS subject, really tie their hands into decisions that they can make. And, the one is there is a true belief that this needs to be a countywide system. And that can be very difficult because if you're providing countywide resources, there's only a baseline that you can move above. I would argue that the unique needs of Mammoth Lakes are slightly different than the needs of areas such as Walker. And, there's a responsibility to try to figure out how we solve some of those issues. And, that's going to get into kind of the next couple of slides. So I'll move to page 55. So what do, a lot of times when I look at my job or frankly anything, I go, okay, what are best practices? How do other places do what we're trying to do? Recognizing that it's an incredibly unique system here. So you have to be cognizant of the fact that the county does have the agreement for providing services here. I believe that if you broke that, we could be in worse shape than, so are there ways of supporting and improving services without threatening the existing systems? And I believe that there are. What do you usually see if you go on a car accident in Lake Tahoe, or if you went up to Vail, or if you went down to where a lot of our people come from, Orange County or something like that, is you're going to see more providers and with a higher level of experience on scene. And these can be tough, not just for the public, but I think they can be tough on providers as well. I'm not going to go through a whole bunch of stories on what happened this winter, but as an example, we had a pretty significant car accident that occurred where we had a full arrest, so a patient that was essentially going to be pronounced. But if you don't have a shortage of resources, your job is to provide the best level of service for that individual. When you get to multiple patients, you're triaging, and you may decide, I'm not going to provide any services for this person because I have multiple people that I have to care for here, but it's not ideal, right? So had a car accident with critical patients as well as a full arrest patient. There was also a call for assisting at an après event at Canyon Lodge that also had a critical patient. And the medic on that day had a very difficult job in front of them where they're trying to provide services for all of this, getting another ambulance to come in from outside. So we ended up Mammoth Fire took the call at Canyon while they provided assistance on the car accident. And then Medic 2 came in and provided further assistance from June on that car accident. And again, the impact that I know it had on that provider was pretty significant. Like that's a lot of pressure to put on them when in other places there might be other providers that can provide that same level of care as that one individual. So in another system, what you might see is not just more ambulances, but more of the providers that can provide that level of care that you see on that incident. And that also creates a surge capacity, right? So that when you have something like what had occurred in June Lake, you don't necessarily send more ambulances, you send paramedics that can assist on that scene. So again, kind of on the local system constraints, I'm trying to find a bring before the community a solution that is taking advantage of this growth in first responders, recognizes that the county may have its hands tied in some ways to where, frankly, there are areas that have no ambulances, and that's something that they politically have to deal with when there is an ask to provide more services in Mammoth Lakes. And do it in a way that frankly we can afford. The reality is if I wanted to add a second ambulance here, one, per agreement, we can't do that because they have the ALS rights currently. Two, it would not cost us less than the county. So we'd be spending 1.5 million that we don't have to do that. So what I'm proposing is, as we're looking at new staff, can we provide ALS on our engine companies? And I've got a little bit here on page 56 on the problem. I think I've kind of defined this a little bit, but I can get into it a little bit more. The area that's changed kind of on the problem is we're seeing just a general increase in call volume. The other things we're seeing is the hospital has made some changes where they're flying more critical patients out that they may have kept in. What that does is pull resources to help support those air transfers. And it's just busier, as everyone can say. Commissioner Easterby?
I just want to verify. Sometimes I kind of just need the bottom line and then hear the rest. That's just the way I process. So are you asking?
Yep.
Your proposed is the ask. Should we have an ALS system provided by ML?
Yes, and I think so. If you go to slide 6, which I was going to get to next on page 56, is like, how do we start to, if we agree that maybe this, I'm not going to call it a problem, but we could be providing better services here. So is there something that we should or potentially be doing different? What are the different options? And I kind of put out there all different types, right? And so the first one would be go to the county and go, look, Mammoth Lakes is just not Walker and we need better service here and you need to provide another ambulance. Again, at a cost of about 1.5. The problem is some of the other ambulances are already getting subsidized both by the county as well as they're picking up that call volume. So the call volume helps support that ambulance. When you add another ambulance to the system, you're just picking up that differential. So it's the least economically efficient piece of the system, right? So I am fairly confident that the county is not in a position that they're going to be adding a 5th ambulance to the system, but that would be one way to solve. Be like, look, can you come in and provide an ambulance? The flip side I'll say is, as soon as that conversation occurred, there is a conversation of, well, maybe that ambulance should really be down in Crowley. And I could absolutely make an argument for that if I was in Crowley or even here. The reality is, if you look at the call distribution, south of June, a significant chunk of it is here and then south all the way down to the border. So the county has a whole bunch of responsibilities. That one's going to be tough as a solution. Another solution would be looking at, Mammoth Fire taking on the services here like they do in White Mountain and Chalfont. And White Mountain and Chalfont has an agreement to do that. And frankly, people aren't happy with that agreement maybe on both sides. But I would say that conceptually it wasn't a bad idea. I think the operationalizing of it was poor in the sense that the county could not afford to put another ambulance, but there was a perceived need to have an ambulance down there. So that contract is $300,000 for White Mountain to provide services within its own district. I believe that there are multiple parties that have a responsibility for the current situation. As much as I want to help everyone, I believe that, ultimately we've got a lot on our plate as a fire district. And really what we should be looking at is, can we build something out similar to the White Mountain agreement, but that has multiple stakeholders coming in who have a vested interest in the EMS system here, supporting us to operationalize our system. And what that would look like as opposed to an ambulance is, as we bring new employees on, we basically send them through paramedic school. So we start to create paramedics on the district. The nice thing is it's about a 10% differential. So while it would cost 1.5 million to add an ambulance, as we bring new staff on, if we're deciding, do we hire a firefighter, do we hire a firefighter paramedic? We're looking at a 10% difference. There are also some additional costs in managing a program, and that's probably the biggest one is I don't have the staff capacity and neither do my chief officers to take on another program right now. So there would be some other costs for the district, but ultimately, you know, if we get to the point of where we have multiple paramedics, and again, this doesn't happen tomorrow, this could happen over a course of multiple years. They're here, they're paramedics. One is there's some interesting things in laws where our ambulance 3371 can go out as a BLS ambulance and we don't take from the contract on the county, but then we can have somebody jump on we can always have paramedics on our engines or on trucks like squads, and there's no problem with that. And then that paramedic can jump onto the ambulance and provide care on scene and transporting in. So from a patient care perspective, you're getting an ALS ambulance without it being an ALS ambulance. It's still a BLS ambulance. So it supports and protects the county agreement. You know, the county can still be holding on to the agreement that frankly, they're grandfathered in on, and we have to be careful because if those agreements started to collapse, you could have third parties trying to come into the community and provide services, which could be detrimental. So what this model does is if you'd had that accident on June, 3 or 4 years from now, we may have a couple paramedics that we can send down there in a squad. They can jump on ambulances and provide the care there. What it provides for in the town of Mammoth Lakes is when you have that car accident, we could have paramedics helping the county medic, as well as if 71 goes up to Main Lodge or Canyon Lodge, a paramedic can go and meet 71 there and provide that care. So from a bang for the buck perspective, there's no cheaper solution, in my opinion, for any of the parties that are involved. So that includes, you know, the needs of the county, the needs of the fire district, and I would add 2 other parties to that, which are the town of Mammoth Lakes and the hospital. And I think that a cooperative agreement that frankly should include the district, the county, the hospital, and the town is kind of the ideal way to increase services in this community, still protect county interests, recognizing we can't fix the whole county, but there are improvements for the whole county in the sense that, like I said, our stretch is wide. We often provide services all the way to June. And if there's nothing available south of here, while still recognizing county's first right to take those calls when they have resources available. Yep.
Just input, you know, I go back to March of 23 when we had a meeting. I think Commissioner Truax was there, myself, and perhaps even you with some of the responders. And, you know, one of the comments that came out of that was, you know, you look at yourself as a town of 7,000 people and that occasionally swells to 35,000. And they said, you're looking at that all wrong. You're a town of 40,000 people that sometimes has 7,000 people in it.
Yeah.
And, you know, we've gotten away with staffing toward what the sign coming into town says, when in fact, a town of 30 or 35,000 people could not survive and wouldn't approve a system like we have now, where ambulances are 20 and 50 miles away.
Yeah.
I think that's what you're saying.
I know.
I'm just saying
completely
that,
agree.
yeah.
And I also, but the flip side of that is, while I see this as a need, and I think it's my responsibility as the fire chief to point out this need, I also feel like we need help. We can't go out and try to solve everybody's problems.
No
And
question.
we are in some ways the best party to operationalize this, but there needs to be support coming, both political and financial, in my opinion, from those other parties.
So what are the next
And
steps to do this?
So on that, you know, a lot of times when you come, you go, well, this isn't my problem. And I would argue, well, we all have a responsibility in this. And I would point back that in 1986.
It is your problem. It's our problem when it is us who are affected.
Yeah.
Right? Or someone.
Sure, or we
that's-
decide not to tackle that problem,
Correct.
but that, you know, over time manifests itself in different ways. So one of the things that's kind of beneficial in having these discussions is prior to the system we have today, there was a JPA, Joint Powers Authority, that was set up to build the EMS system in the county. And the parties that paid into that system were the county paid the biggest portion, the town, Mammoth Lakes Fire District, and the hospital. The hospital actually paid the second largest portion, but, and then the town and the fire district paid slightly less. But all four parties felt that they had some level of responsibility for making sure we have a solid EMS system serving the area. So I've started those conversations with all three of those parties. The county is not opposed to this in the sense that I've talked to quite a few different parties, and I've even talked to the paramedics, if there's any of them in here. I've talked to the station captains, because one of the ways that if you build a system like this, it will only work if you have good relationships in the field. You can't have two different parties showing up on a patient and have contention over who should be doing what and that sort of thing. So it only works with cooperation on the incidents. That piece they've agreed to. There's still concerns from the county of like, well, who should be funding this? My next conversation was with the town. The town is supportive. They still have, they went through their budgeting last month, and they have frustrations with why should we take this on? Again, I would point to the JP, but they did vote that if an agreement's reached, that they would have a financial interest in that agreement to help support this. I've had similar discussions with the hospital. The hospital pretty strongly said, let's go back to the county and have some more discussions with them on this, which I believe is appropriate. You know, I believe that if we can provide this service at, you know, and can explain to the county, yes, you do have some responsibilities in this area that are unique. And you can make an argument that sometimes there's a lower level of care because you're pulling that ambulance out so often. And frankly, the subsidy is not occurring in this area to the extent that it's occurring everywhere else. So I kind of want to make a deal to them. That's the best deal that they're ever going to get, honestly, as far as assisting this program. So the ask is that we structure an agreement similar to what White Mountain has, and that there's one provider providing services, which I think we're the best of, but those other parties are financial partners in this. And what I would recommend is that we are looking at $300,000. I feel like that's something that would be something that the other parties could come in and bear, but would also give me the opportunity to offset those costs that the district would see with this, including kind of the administrative portion, and then the increases on the employee costs. And then we need a longer contract. You know, we can't make commitments on this without some agreement from the other parties that they are invested in this. So what I propose is a 5-year agreement, at which point we would reassess how services are going.
So
Go from there.
what does an ambulance, I know this is a horrible question to ask. What does an ambulance make?
So some ambulances make, what I would say is,
What does our ambulance make?
our ambulance right now makes very little because we're not even reimbursing for a large chunk of our calls. But this, at best, an ambulance may bring in, especially in additional ones. So let me give this to you another way. On the first slide, it spoke on the county system. The county system costs about 5.5 million. It brings in 1.3 million in reimbursement.
Per ambulance? Oh,
Total.
Oh, sorry. In total. Okay.
So
Okay.
that gives you some
So a
idea.
couple $100,000.
Anytime, yes, anytime you run a system like this, somebody is going to be subsidizing it. Now,
Yeah.
how much is subsidized depends on the cost of the program. I would argue that the county program is expensive. I would argue that a fire-based program, if you just look at it from an EMS perspective, is expensive compared to a private.
Right.
Other than they are dual mandate, they're doing two things. They're providing EMS.
The reason
And
I, the
fire.
reason I asked, 20 years ago, my wife broke her collarbone on the mountain, had to be taken off. And the ambulance ride from Main Lodge to the hospital was $1,000.
Yeah,
Now, I don't know where that went.
it's tripled.
Yeah, oh, I'm sure.
And
But
then,
I don't know where that goes.
But yeah, but the other thing that's interesting is, again, now we're getting into healthcare. Your Medicare reimbursement on those,
Yeah.
or sorry, Medicare reimbursement is about $147.
I
last time I
wasn't on
checked.
Medicare. at the time.
Exactly. So,
Yeah.
so there's a couple things that are unique here, right? One is we don't
Why
have
are you looking
your,
at me when you say
you don't have your standard
that? No, I understand.
AE here.
The bill is
Um,
3,000, Medicare pays 200 and,
Correct. And that's where some of those numbers are not realistic of what
Right.
comes in. I would say that
I'm
any
talking to retail
funding,
customer.
yes, we will bring some funds in to help support this program,
Yeah.
but I would not be banking on them. What I would say is, this is something where we would want to have some of our costs supported by our partners who also feel that this is important enough and recognize that EMS is a losing game no matter how you play it. I just think we can play better than some other partners because we already have holding costs on staff. Now, the unique thing is, it's very hard for me to tell existing staff, you have to go to paramedic school. You can do some of that, and I think those are discussions we're already having, but it's a lot easier as you're bringing on new staff to make that a requirement of the job moving forward and still working with your existing staff. So we do have a period in time here to look at this, recognizing we also can't sit on our hands because we also have this wildfire threat that we have to move forward on. But at this time, there is interest in looking at this from the town. The county's not opposed to it. I'm not saying that they're interested, but they're not opposed to it. I
So
would
are the
argue,
next steps to get the hospital, the town and ourselves to meet with the county? Is that?
yeah,
that
so,
your-
so the next step, so the administrators already were working through that. So we're having some discussions where basically I've met with Rob and I've met with Tom Parker. And we're gonna sit down with Sandra from the county. And the county's also set up a EMS committee, which probably won't move at the speed that we need to make some decisions on. But at least we can have some definitive answers on this. And then the goal would be that we bring some sort of agreement to all the parties interested to see if there's interest in bringing up the level of care in this manner, which would then obviously go before all the boards to approve and move forward on.
So
So that's an airport transfer that's now Mammoth is going to be with the first ALS ambulance is just out of June, just to provide perspective. So, there is no ask of the board at this time, other than if this is an idea you don't want us to pursue at all, then tell me at this time. Really, I think the ask is that staff continues to work with partners and hoard some sort of recommendation of a solution via an agreement to look at providing these services with all four parties having ownership in the solution.
At the risk of sounding like deja vu, we've kind of talked around this multiple times, I believe, and I appreciate you bringing it forward as something that, rather than wait till something happens and say, oh, we need to build this now because this, you're forward thinking, and that if you look at the first document that we reviewed, just in this preliminary document, it talks about, we have a census of about 7,000 people. But we know that on any given weekend, we could have 24 to 25,000 people. So that's what we need to prepare for. And I think you're right. We could staff with paramedics on engines, but one thing I was going to ask you of that is then, is there by law or requirement for certain types of additional equipment to be available that would be, in an ambulance? And secondly, if we have new people that you bring on that would have to then go through paramedic school, could you provide an incentive for existing personnel? Say, hey, it wasn't in your purview at first, but we asked to be a firefighter, but also maybe you would consider this. Here's an additional incentive for that.
Yep.
For new or existing.
Yep. So absolutely. I think that yes. So equipment, we, at any point in time, the board can decide we want to have paramedics legally, and you can decide to place paramedics on all non-transport equipment. So that means that as a chief, I could carry paramedic equipment. I wouldn't recommend it because I haven't started IV in a while. Engine companies typically have equipment on it, on any engine that you see in kind of the areas that's discussed, like Tahoe or LA County. And then the other piece of equipment that, you typically see, because of some of these nuances, are what's called squads. So when I did my paramedic internship at LA County, I was assigned to Squad 98. And a squad is essentially a fancy pickup truck. And what ends up happening in LA County, because of a lot of the issues that we're discussing here, is you go on an incident and you end up having AMR shows up with two not well-paid EMTs who are hopefully gonna move on in life at some point, a squad and an engine. And then depending on the severity of the patient, either AMR just takes them in for the broken finger, on-scene care happens, which includes the engine company and the squad. And then when it's a critical patient, a member of the squad jumps on to the ambulance with AMR and provides ALS care with AMR on the way to the hospital. So essentially, we'd be doing a similar thing where our ambulance would stay BLS for legal reasons, for agreements and for relationships. But we would potentially have a squad that would show up. And depending on the call, the nice thing about our system is we're very flexible. There's times when we send out a type 6, there's times when we send out an ambulance, there's times when we send out a water tender, all with the same staff. Like that is one of the beauties of our system. So depending on the call, an engine may go, a squad may go, or an ambulance, and some of those may go, and we will provide the appropriate level of care. There's absolute equipment cost for that. And just to give you some perspective, I spoke with Chief Bullock, who runs the EMS program. They recently received a grant for an ambulance. Now, this is a top to bottom ambulance that includes things that you don't think are that expensive, but the gurneys nowadays is I can't even guess, I think it's a $40,000 system. A monitor is a $50,000 piece. So it's radios and everything, $340,000 for a fully equipped ambulance. If you're just getting a box with a chassis, then you could probably do it for about $250. Long term, what the paramedics end up having to do is they do remounts. So they buy one and then they just take the box, and for $125,000 they can remount it. But on the front end, there's absolutely costs with ambulances. I would recommend, if we went down this route, we'd look at some squads where we may have to purchase pickups anyways because of the changes in our staffing. So in some ways, we're going to have sunken costs as we grow our program capacity. I would just argue we're in the best position to be providing both services at the same time. But I also feel that these other parties have some responsibility in this as much as we do.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And I mean, if you look at the source of revenue for Mono County, a large percentage has to be coming from that.
Yeah.
It's not.
So-
Lake or Levine.
so-
No offense to them.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think if you look at that both from the tax perspective and from the actual reimbursable calls I was referring to, that is correct. It doesn't change the fact that politically they have responsibilities and, for these outlying regions. And I'm going to say they have their hands tied in what are financial solutions, what are political solutions. And what I'm bringing is truly a solution that I frankly think everybody can get behind. And that's kind of the intent there.
Yeah, and it's not as if you're going to them to reduce service, because a zero-sum game says, okay, you got to take an ambulance out of June Lake and put it in Crowley, or Levining goes dark, or something else. This is an additive solution, which doesn't diminish service anywhere else and provides what we need to provide for them.
And to that, I would argue that, the difficulty is, in my opinion, the county EMS system already feels pressures on it from other areas that aren't receiving care, and even some that are receiving pretty good care relative to other rural areas. And so, even asking them for 100,000 is going to put them in a very uncomfortable situation. I still think it's the right thing to do, but they're in a tough spot to find solutions for this.
Do we need a motion or just board consensus?
So I was just at this time looking for two things: board consensus. And I do feel like, yes, I have mentioned to you this before, but the last thing I'm going to do is come to the group with an agreement without someone, well, this is not what we wanted. So I'm really looking for kind of a little direction. Is this in the direction that we feel we should be going, and, continue down this path? Because there's budget implications for a lot of these other organizations. There's implications with our staff as we look at MOUs and hiring. And while we're not making any decisions, we're going to be making other decisions that will be impacted on how we decide to proceed with this.
Can I sort of summarize the ask there, right? So consider working with, partners. You know, town, county, hospital, I'm just. To work together to form some sort of authoritative group. And what happened to the group that was existing prior group, Joint Powers Authority?
So it collapsed and the county took on the whole burden.
Got it.
So the county took on the whole burden, although I would argue Mammoth Lakes Fire Protection District continued to provide backup services. So we still carry some of that burden regardless.
Okay.
The other thing that this does is it's always difficult to understand kind of where systems are and where organizations are financially. But I will tell you that every time that there has been economic uncertainty and hard decisions made with budgets, the EMS program is one of the few large unmandated programs. And when you look at, if you had to make some significant cuts to the county, there's very few places you can do that. Now, that would be hard political cuts. But you know, always a concern is if that system fell apart, we would not be in a position to stand something up here today without a significant financial burden on whomever decided to pay it. And that would be a much harder conversation. You know, starting up a program like that today on a several month or even a year's notice will be incredibly difficult. What this does is build some regional capacity that helps kind of protect the interests of this community if that system did ever have any issues, which unfortunate to say, it always does end up being kind of first on the chopping block when the county is in a tough position.
I'm 100% behind the forethought and also the incentive to actually bring this forward, which is always a hard thing because now you've opened up that can. And I think, so if the ask is, will we move forward to gain that additional help, or what level that ends up coming to, that, yeah, that we can address that. And then secondly, because it's the second part is what portion would we then take on to support that, which is hiring people to take to the EMS, so the EMS school and the equipment also, right?
Yep. And so the ask is that as I'm moving into negotiations, I have some board direction is that you are considering this. At this point, I consider this very probable in the sense that the town has made a commitment to support this. The hospital is interested, and I think I could have some good conversations with the county. At some point, I would, best case scenario, I come to you in agreement with all four parties interested. You know, less good agreement is, hey, I got 3 other parties that feel like this is the right thing to do. The 4th one just refuses, and you would have to make a decision at that point. I still believe that this is something that we need to take a long, hard look at. So all of those things would come back to you, but what it does for me is it lets me start working more with other administrators, further with staff, and kind of forecast like this has some legs and this is real, even though no agreements have been signed. Let's start taking a long, hard look at this because I agree. I mean, I think that we should have, if we move forward, some incentives for our current staff to go back to paramedic school. I think that's ideally, again, we have to spend 90% of the cost regardless. That extra 10% in my mind is well worth it if we could provide both sides of service on that. So,
yeah, I'm in support of it as well. And I don't remember what order it came in, but when we did the survey for Measure M, EMS services was right up there in terms of importance with the community. So.
How do you want to formalize that?
Well, all we really need is just consensus direction to the chief to move forward to chat with the partners. I would just say, I'm certainly supportive. I do think to the extent that you can, work with the hospital, I think that Mono County is probably going to be the trickiest one, just given geography, historic political issues. So, to the extent that you can, I would definitely lean on the hospital to assist you there, and with the elected board of commissioners to perhaps speak to electeds in the county too, and at the town. I think, we can kind of help provide some of that clarity and understanding to those folks to the extent you guys are willing to want to volunteer. You do that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. But yeah, I think we're all supportive and we all understand, and we know certainly, how many medical calls are happening. So it's something that has to be addressed. Does that provide sufficient
yeah,
direction?
absolutely. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, everybody. And obviously you'll bring back.
Correct, yep. So as we move forward, I will give regular updates to the board. If we get to the point, ideally of an agreement at some point, that would come to the board. And as we work through the budgeting process, I'll be making, recommendations based on this potentially moving forward.
Any public comments in the room on this item, just since it does impact all of you? No, okay, cool. All right, with that, item number 9, Chief Officer and Staff Reports. We have a report on a wildland program from Chief McCarthy.
All right, so let me just update you on a couple things relative to our seasonal crew and the work we've been doing. So the first one is we're finishing up with the CAL FIRE grant. This is the kind of last year of that grant. We're working on expending the funds. We did put a budget request in to them that just got approved, but we haven't got the final signature yet. Just to shift some money around from one category to another. We thought we were going to spend some more on some environmental analysis. We're shifting around to buy some more equipment. I expect to have that in the next couple of weeks, and then I'll come back to you guys probably next board hearing to authorize some purchases for some brush cutter, fancy weed whackers and chainsaws and some other equipment that we're using to do some of that fuel reduction around town. And also we got approval to buy a crew cab pickup truck for the crew. We've been currently using one of the rigs from Station 2. But so we'll have a more dedicated rig for them with a shell on it and all that kind of stuff, so they can hold the gear and use that as a transport vehicle. But so both of those, I expect hopefully by next board hearing, I'll have budget stuff for you to approve on purchases. On fuels reduction work, we kind of finished the MUPS work from the skate park up to the stop sign by the high school. Kind of just cleaned up around the MUPS trail there, the multi-use path, to make it a little bit larger of a fire break. Give us a better strategic option when we're defending homes and the trails if something were to come from that area. We've been working in the parcel behind Center Street, so kind of behind the Cinnamon Bear Inn and the Better Fireplace place. They're near the new town's low-income properties there. There's kind of a meadow in there that had some old piles and standing dead, so we've been working in there to clean that up. We've been doing some miscellaneous small projects around town. I will say that we're kind of stuck waiting for an agreement to be signed with the Forest Service to do a couple of the strategic fire breaks we want to do around other places of town. So we're pushing hard. We're leveraging, we've got the town leveraging against them and everybody trying to push on them to get the agreement. We're also trying to find some creative ways around it in the meantime, but that is kind of a little bit of a log jam for some of the larger strategic areas we had hoped to work. So we may be pivoting to a lot more of the private parcel stuff. And to that end, we've gotten the inspection program kind of up and running. The crew has got 2 people a day assigned to doing the inspections. So we've got about 375 done already. They're getting 50 plus a day. We have not pushed those reports out to the people yet because we were working on some more back end stuff to clean up the reports before we send it out. But starting next week, I think we will have those start to be pushed out to homeowners. So start to get those. Everybody the feedback I'm getting is everybody that approached them on the street while they're doing them is very supportive. I'm very, and we've tried to pitch this as an informative educational thing. This is not a punitive action at this point. We'll see if that tide turns a little bit when they get an inspection report that says, wait, I got to do something on my property. We'll see how that goes. But again, everything we've pushed is about, hey, these are things that you could do to make your home more defensible and more resilient to wildfire. We have not come in with a heavy hand or threatening we're coming back in 30 days to make sure you've done this or any of that kind of stuff. This is just sort of informative, educational. But I think at the progress we're making and we're speeding up, last week was the first full week we did this. So I think we're well on target. We could make, our original goal was to try to get about 1/3 of the 4,500 something parcels done. It's a smaller number than the 10,000 parcels you hear about, or 11,000, because the condos are usually considered one big complex that we do rather than 80 individual units or 100. But we also are going to offer services through those inspections that, we have some free tarps to give away. We also are going to offer to try to help residents if they need help doing some of the fuels reduction on their property. So limbing up some of the trees that they may not have pole saws for, dropping some of the smaller trees that are in the understory and that some of that spacing. We're going to try to prioritize the residents, especially those with access functional needs or seniors or low income or in high hazard areas. The program has kind of all those features in them. So we're trying that and we'll see what the take rate is. And we may have to tighten up or widen down, tighten up or widen up as we go to get right. But that'll be another thing that is work for our people to do. We'll send a crew out that helps do that work on people's properties. And the chipping crew, we've been doing chipping. So we're working with the town. We're probably going to they'd like us to present next week at the next town council meeting, which is July 2nd, to kind of give them a rundown of what we've been doing and accomplishing. I think town manager is really interested in kind of showing what we're doing to help people in town. And so we'll kind of focus on that. But we'll probably put a bit, with them an ad in the paper too, to kind of promote the services that people can log into this and see their inspection reports, make use of the chipping service and that kind of stuff. So, but we're kind of working our way through the town on those inspections. I think we'll easily hit the goal of a third of them this year, honestly. And the fuels reduction work we've been hitting super hard with a crew of 11 or 12 people. It's been amazing how fast we can get through stuff that used to be weeks worth of work. So we've gotten, they've caught up with almost everything we've got pre-approval for at this point. And so now we're gonna pivot a little bit, do some more inspections, and we're working around the edges to try to get some of this private parcel work in there. But I think that's the key of where we're at with our crew right now and the work they've been getting done.
Yeah, and I'd just add kind of big picture outside of our program. They've always been a great partner, but White Bark, we've been trying to support them. And if you haven't had a chance to drive up Old Mammoth, drive up and take a look between Red Fir and the Bluffs. The work out there is amazing. It makes me feel like in a few years, we're gonna have a fighting chance here if something significant did come through, because it's a completely different forest and it's a healthy forest. And the reality is when these things started, there was so much pushback. Now we were out there training last Thursday night and there's people coming up to us like, oh, here we go. And they were excited. And because, the reality is, you cut down some of our trees, all you see is more trees. Like we're in a pretty good situation here where a lot of these projects are truly leading to healthier forests. So between the work that we're doing within the community, with White Bark's doing kind of around, we still have a couple log jams to get through, but I would have been all doom and gloom 2 years ago. I'm starting to see a little bit of I'm not gonna say it yet, but I feel like we're making good progress.
Yeah. Thank you. Also, the shirts are awesome.
Yeah.
All right, any questions for Chief McCarthy? Okay, I don't think we have any district fire chief reports. So item number 11, board member comments. Anyone have anything? I just have two. One, I was at town council the evening that everyone who worked on the in-fire and backfilled was recognized. So I thought that was really great. Great to see a good turnout. Always really, really happy when you all have the opportunity to be recognized for the awesome work that you do. So thanks to everybody who showed up, and thanks also to the mayor and council for providing that recognition. I thought that was really nice. And then the other one is Councilmember John Wentworth has approached Mammoth Lakes Tourism over at my day job to actually work on creating a video showing some of this work that's happening. So I'll be working on that and probably reaching out to you to see if we can get some shots. I know that you and Lawson provided that great video. So that's kind of a little bit of an inspiration for that, but definitely just want to be able to show. I think Councilmember Wentworth has some opportunities to show state officials the work that's happening here from wildfire mitigation and other things, given public lands issues. So I really look forward to hopefully being able to highlight our wildland crew work while you guys are doing all that. So more to come on that. Any association comments? Okay, awesome. Thank you. Any announcements? Okay, great. Okay, so administrative business, item 14, our next regularly scheduled meeting is for noon on July 22nd. How's that looking calendar wise for everyone?
Looks good. Yeah.
I'm good.
Yep.
Great, so sounds like we'll have a quorum, we'll keep that. And so with that, I'm actually going to adjourn us into closed session. Our closed session today is a conference with legal counsel on existing litigation, paragraph 1 of subdivision D of section 54956.9. Name of case is Snow Creek 7 Condominium Owners Association et al. Versus Town of Mammoth Lakes Fire Protection District et al. Case number 24UCM48.
So on item 15, I apologize, it's actually on me. Did not get with our counsel quick enough to be able to make him available. So we have our general counsel, but we also have a specialized counsel dealing only with this item.
Okay.
The item's not time sensitive, but we need to work to get the council up to speed. So my recommendation would be that we take this item and move it to our next meeting if that works for the board.
Do you want to, did you want to give us any update, or do you want to just?
I don't know how much we can because it's only agendized as closed session, so.
Okay, is everybody comfortable with continuing that until July?
Yes.
Okay, great. So in that case, we will adjourn at 1:50 PM. Thanks, everyone.